All right, well, howdy y'all. Welcome to the Lonely Oak Wine Review. I'm Rick, and as usual, I'll be walking you through today's wine. So today we're going through an Italian. So for those that saw my last review, you know that was kind of the last of my focus on Texas. Certainly I'm going to make my way back around to some more Texas wines, but just decided it was high time to move into the more international varieties. And of course I had to start with an Italian. For anyone that knows me and knows my preference on wine, I absolutely love Italian wine, both the more modern styles as well as those traditional styles. So this falls right in line with that. A little more specifically, this is coming from the DOC of Cannonau di Sardegna, on the island of Sardinia, which is just off the west coast of Italy. It's one of the largest Mediterranean islands, in fact. And so this is actually made up 90% of Cannonau, the grape, as well as Bovale Sardo. I don't know why I have so much trouble with that grape. Very dyslexic on that one. And then 5% Carignano as well. So, which on its own expresses beautifully in Sardinia, but that's a whole nother story there. So, before we dive into the wine, I'll do a little bit of history on the island and the grape itself. So Cannonau is in fact a synonym for Grenache, or Granaca as it's known in Spain, which brings us to some of that history. So during the Middle Ages, the Kingdom of Aragon actually conquered and subsequently ruled for about 400 years the island of Sardinia, and it's commonly believed that that's how Cannonau or Grenache made its way to Sardinia, although there is kind of a growing population of folks that believe it was the other way around, and in fact Cannonau originated on Sardinia and was thus brought back to Spain as Granaca, and then eventually spilled its way over into the Rhone Valley of France, where it became Grenache, and some of the finer examples have been displayed there. So as I said, 90% Cannonau on this one. This was coming from the Costera vineyard of the Argiolas family there in Sardinia. So a very influential family in Sardinia, as well as the Italian wine overall. They were among the first to move in that region, to move from the traditional style of quantity over quality. So Antonio Argiolas acquired about 7 acres from his father back in 1938, where he started to make that switch and focus on lower yields and a higher quality fruit. So his sons certainly carried on that tradition in the late 70s and 80s. They actually replanted most of those vineyards. So the vines that this one's coming from is roughly in that 40-year range. A little side note on the Argiolas family. Interestingly enough, so Antonio, along with a gentleman by the name of Giacomo Tascis, actually kind of brought that focus on the southern region of Cannonau. So those that aren't familiar with Tascis's work, you may be familiar with the name Antinori. So that's kind of where he became the most renowned. So he, along with the Antinori family, actually began the prototypes for what's known as Super Tuscans. So way back in the day, Tuscany, along with the rest of Italy, has very stringent guidelines in terms of what grapes can go into what wines and what percentages and things like that. So they wanted to depart from that and start planting some more French grapes, such as Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, and create these more Bordeaux style blends, if you will, but with that Tuscany terroir characteristic to it. So they developed, they being Tascis and the Antinoris, developed a wine called the Tignanello, which, like I said, was the prototype to the Super Tuscans, and they went on to develop Sassicaia as well as Solaya. And for anyone who's familiar with those wines knows what kind of heavy hitters those certainly bring. So I won't dive too much into the Antinoris. I could spend a whole day on that family, quite a bit of history there. But just wanted to give you a background of some of the folks that helped develop these vineyards and some of the reputation. But Antonio and Tascis actually developed what is widely believed as the flagship wine of the region, and certainly the flagship of the family, known as Touriga. So that one is a blend of pretty much entirely Sardinian grapes, being Carignano, Cannonau, Malvasia, Nera, as well as the Bovale Sardo that I just cannot hammer into my brain. So anyway, moving on to this one, as I said, the Costera Vineyards, where this comes from. And it is a fantastic wine. We'll go ahead and get it in the bottle here. And as usual, first thing you're gonna see is that outstanding color to this wine. Rather deep, but not terribly dark, as is common with Grenache or Cannonau. But a phenomenal clarity, speaking to that quality they have going, and then some pretty good viscosity. Put it at about a medium plus, to be honest with you. And then as we get it down on the nose, yeah, it's had a chance to warm up quite a bit, so it is expressing beautifully. But yeah, the primary notes I get, definitely some dark cherry, along with, pardon my hair, hopefully it's looking all right with this wind. So along with that dark cherry, very dark cherry, you kind of get a little bit of a brighter note of strawberry out of this one. And then one thing that I've picked up on Sardinian wine in particular is a lot of floral aspects, you know, such as their Vermentinos and the Carignanos and things like that. Carignanos I've noticed to be a little more on the earthy side, but this one in particular expresses beautifully with a floral note, a little more on the rose petal side is kind of what I was getting out of it. Not so much that violet that you get a lot from, you know, the Nebbiolos and things in northern Italy. So beautiful, beautiful nose. And then diving in on the palate. It is admittedly tight, being such a young wine. Like I said, the 2017 with a lot of Italians, as well as a lot of French wines made in that more traditional style. They're gonna come out a little tight at a young age, but that bodes well for a little bit of time in the cellar. But certainly an approachable wine. You know, the tannins are certainly there, but a little bit softer, a lot softer than I had anticipated, but there's certainly a great bit of grip on there, as well as enough backbone and a really clear minerality. So that's probably more of a testament to the calcareous, pebbly soils that these grapes are actually grown on. So being that it was a little bit tight, I did not decant this wine. It's a bit of a hot debate, not as hot of a debate as I think it should be. I think people, and I think I may have mentioned this in previous reviews, but I think people are a little quick to decant. But I must say that this is one that probably would have benefited. Had I had more people to share it with, I probably would have decanted, but I wasn't planning on going through the whole bottle in one go. So in this case, I just kept it all in there so as not to double decant, because I just think that's a little over the top in most cases. But I went ahead and paired this with some food, which worked out beautifully. So what I ended up doing, I went kind of an easy traditional route, but with me, I always have to kind of overcomplicate things. So for the first time, I made some meatballs from scratch. I'd never done that before. Turned out excellent, if I may say so myself. And as well as some scratch pasta, as well as some scratch focaccia, which was another first for me. So it was an exciting meal to try out, particularly with this wine. And I actually served it a little bit chilled with that dish, because when I said that I complicated things a little bit, rather than using just traditional Italian spices, I moved more to a Tex-Mex style. So I used a lot of, for instance, whole Mexican oregano, whole cumin seed, which I prefer to use over ground cumin. It's just got a little bit of a fresher taste, understandably, but just a little bit cleaner, a little more fuller. And you know, just a little bit goes a long way, and it's something to do with the whole seed without grounding it up. I don't know, it's just a better expression of the cumin flavor, and it's not over the top, because that powderized version is just going to seep and get into everywhere. So you're not, every single bite isn't just laced with cumin. It's you know, a little bit sporadic here and there. So I also used a bit of chili powder and red pepper flakes, things like that. So, and then enough garlic and a touch of garlic and basil, just kind of round it out and keep it to its roots. But it ended up working out perfectly. Like I said, I chilled it just a little bit, which is a great way if you're approaching a little bit more of a spicy dish with a red wine, particularly a tannic dry red wine. That chill will kind of soften those tannins up, and it's actually going to express beautifully with things like chili powder and stuff like that. So that's exactly what I did on this one, and like I said, it just went above and beyond. Those who know me know that I believe a true pairing elevates both the wine and the dish, and they don't just taste good together, and that's exactly what happened here. And particularly when a pairing develops a new flavor apart from either the dish or the wine. And again, that's what came out with this one. That acid from the tomato, which, by the way, the meatballs and pasta. So with those meatballs, I actually cooked them at about 500 degrees in the oven for about 7 minutes, and then steeped them in a reduction sauce that had been reducing for about 6 hours. Left them in there for about 2 hours, and it was phenomenal. Like I said, the acids from the tomato and that tomato flavor just were incredibly elevated with this wine. So in terms of what I'm going to rate it as, certainly going to be a foodie, but as I had mentioned, because it was so tight, certainly not unapproachable. I want to reiterate, but it was a little bit tight. I'd be very happy to see what this does in the cellar over the next few years. So it'd be my recommendation to buy 2, drink 1, store the other, and at a $15 price point, it's not going to hurt you. So even if it doesn't work out, you're only 30 bucks in the hole with those 2. So, but I will tell you with a great degree of confidence that you won't be disappointed in this one, especially you go that traditional route and use some of the red sauce Italian dishes. And it's very common on Sardinia to use meats cooked over open flame. So any of your grilled meats, pork on a spit is one that I kept running into as I was researching on this one. So don't be afraid to go that route. And for you Texans out there, I mean, we love our meat on flame. So this is a great one to sprinkle into your next Texas barbecue and kind of branch out from the more local options. So again, I did want to point out, this one didn't get a lot of high regard from some of the publications out there. It was the high 80s in terms of points. So I did want to address at least where I stand on the point system. It is a phenomenal tool to give you a starting point in terms of what you're looking at. But it's important to note that the folks, very qualified folks, I mean, certainly more qualified than I am to a lot of degrees. But wine, like music, like time, like beauty, it's all subjective to the observer. So particularly when you factor in the chemistry involved with tasting wine, there's all kinds of different compounds that could be in your mouth from things you've eaten, if you had brushed your teeth, things you had drank. So you can have a lot of different reactions when you're tasting a wine, as well as the personal preference on top of that. So with a lot of these publications and point systems, you end up getting ratings based on their subjective point of view, which certainly, like I said, there's no problem with that, and these people know more than enough in terms of what they're talking about, but it is one person's opinion. So I think a lot of people put too much stock in the point system, but it's important to note that it is subjective, and don't shy away from a wine just because it doesn't break that 90-point marker. There's too many people that say, oh, well, I don't drink below 90 points. Well, you're missing a lot of good stuff. And a lot of those wines might be 80 points now, but you put 10 years of cellar time on it, and who knows how it's going to express. So this is one of those, absolutely, that I would push beyond its points, and again, I'd be very curious to see where it ends up in the future. So just wanted to touch on that there, and kind of my preference as far as how all that goes. Drink wine by the location, drink wine by the varietal. Don't put all your stock in what everybody else has to say about it. So don't be afraid to try something yourself. And another tactic I like to use as well is I don't research the wine prior to tasting, because sometimes that's one of the great things about wine, in fact, is that the rich history behind a wine will elevate in your mind how much you like it. So I like to go in cold, go in blind, figure out what my tasting notes are, and then I'll go and see what everyone else's tasting notes are and some of the history on it. And then usually my preference is just elevated with those additional elements. So yeah, don't be afraid to figure it out for yourself. But that's enough of that rant. I'll get off my soapbox there. Keep tuning in. We'll have plenty of good dishes to come up, and some more wines. We'll be jumping across some great expanses of ocean to try some different stuff. So tune in, and again, we've got the private tastings going. I'd be happy to provide some bites of some of my signature dishes. So you can do your bookings on Facebook, or you can email at lonelyoakwine@gmail.com and contact me directly. My phone number and all that good stuff, all that contacts up on Instagram. So give me a shout if you have any questions or want to make a booking. I'd be happy to make it happen, and of course making whatever adjustments to meet state standards and then personal standards for the COVID and everything going on there. So hope to see you again next week. From here on, we're going to be starting as a weekly segment. So every Friday you can expect to see one of these reviews. So I just wanted to run through that Texas focus kind of quickly before moving on to the weekly international reviews. So we'll see you on the next one. See you next Friday. And yeah, thanks for tuning in.